Placebo is a misnomer, as I am going to illustrate to you today. It's a word I'd be happy to get rid of because it's really a cover-up word. It's a blanket word. It's what we use when we don't know what else to use, and we don't want to talk about some of the more soft things that have big impact in healthcare. Things like meaning and context. And I'm going to propose that meaning, conditioning, expectation, the context effects are better to be used instead of the term placebo, because that takes the blanket off or opens up the hood of the car, allows us to look underneath to see what's actually driving the car, what's the engine, what's operating underneath the engine that leads to healing. So here's an overview of what I'd like to talk about. I'm going to talk about the dilemma of what I call the P word, the placebo word, and suggest that we look underneath that hood and begin to talk about meaning and context effects, or the MAC effects. And apologies to MAC. Can we then ask the question, can we disentangle these? Can we begin to ferret out what leads to meaning? What context effects have those kinds of impacts, so that we can begin to isolate, understand, and then more intelligently use those? What are the implications for practice and research? I'll touch base on that a little bit, based on a case that was an actual case that I had in my practice, and then talk a little bit about some of the ethical issues, and can we then organize what we're learning around the placebo to deliver it, and I'm going to suggest what that is an optimal healing environment. So Dan Morm and I, several years ago, wrote an article in the Annals of Internal Medicine, and we suggested that we stop using that word, or at least we use it much more precisely, and start instead talking about the meaning effect. And I broadened that, and others have broadened that, to call it the meaning and context effects, because sometimes just the context makes a difference. And so we define that as the physiological, psychological, and clinical effects of meaning and context in treatment. Sometimes inert substances, let's call them placebos, are used to help us understand the meaning and context effects and response and how that works. So this kind of definition would help us disentangle the underlying aspects that placebos or inert treatments, pills and things, are being used to help us understand. Now, you'll find throughout the literature nobody's adopted this so far. It's gradually gaining prominence in the literature, but you'll still see people using the term placebo when they really mean the non-specific art and meaning and context effects in those areas. And in fact, you'll see me use it here because I'm going to summarize the literature a bit in those areas. But I'm going to use more and more what are those meaning and context effects. If we stop talking about placebo and we assume deception is off the table, we don't want to do that. What about the meaning and context effects that go through the everyday rituals that I've just described? The clinical encounter, if it in itself is the therapeutic agent, if it's embodied in the interaction, the expectation, the context, the relationship that you have, if it in fact is the placebo effect or is producing the placebo effect, then the meaning and context effects must be used. There's an imperative to use it, because without using it, we are providing substandard, sub-evidenced effect of treatment and medicine to our patients. Guess what that's called? That is an optimal healing environment. In our framework of optimal healing environments, we are attempting to take what looks like a hodgepodge of all these things that you get out of the healing literature that placebo actually helps us understand, and organize it in a way so people could measure it, learn about it, deliver it, structure it, to optimize the positive aspects and, most important, minimize the negative aspects of not paying attention to this. Because if we don't pay attention to it, we're likely causing harm, but we don't even know it.